So Zachary and I had this absolutely perfect thing going for like a year and a half. I'm talking about the kind of relationship that made other couples jealous. You know, we met back in high school through mutual friends on Instagram, but never actually hung out until this party freshman year of college. The second we started talking in person, it was like everything just clicked. He was different from all the other guys, didn't party every weekend, didn't drink himself stupid. Actually had his shit together. His family absolutely adored me too. His mom would always tell him how lucky he was to have found someone so mature and responsible. Even his dad, who barely talked to anyone, would joke about how I was the responsible one keeping Zachary in line. We did everything together. Holidays with both families, study sessions that actually involved studying, weekend trips to visit his cousins upstate. I integrated into his whole world seamlessly. His little sister Sarah was turning 13 soon, and she already considered me like her big sister. I'd help her pick out clothes for school dances and listen to her complain about her annoying friends. The whole family dynamic was honestly perfect. Zachary never gave me any reason to worry about other girls either. He'd get invited to parties and either wouldn't go or would ask me to come with him. Never flirted with anyone. Never even looked at other girls when we were out. I used to think it was sweet how devoted he was. But after a while, it started feeling kind of limiting. Don't get me wrong, I loved what we had. But I'm 22 years old. And I started realizing that maybe we were being a little too comfortable. You know, I'd been listening to this podcast about relationship evolution and reading some really interesting articles about how couples in their 20s shouldn't feel pressured to be monogamous just because society expects it. The whole concept made so much sense to me. Why should we limit ourselves when we're in our prime? We could explore other connections while still maintaining our strong foundation. It seemed like such a mature, modern approach to love. The more I thought about it, the more excited I got about the possibility we were solid enough to handle it. And honestly, it might even make our relationship stronger. I'd read about couples who became closer after opening things up because they chose each other every day, instead of just staying together out of habit. Plus, I figured Zachary would appreciate how thoughtful I was being about our future. Most girls would just get bored and cheat, or break up. But I was actually trying to find a solution that worked for both of us. So one evening when we were hanging out at his apartment, I decided to bring it up. I'd been planning what to say for days, making sure I approached it in the most mature way possible. I've been thinking about something. I started, and he looked up from his laptop with that attentive expression he always got when I wanted to have a serious conversation. I've been reading about how a lot of couples our age are exploring more open relationship structures, and I think it might be something worth considering for us. He just stared at me for a second, and I could see the wheels turning in his head. Then he asked, "Is this about someone else?" Which honestly kind of annoyed me. Like, I'm trying to have an intellectual discussion about relationship dynamics, and he immediately jumps to some assumption about me having someone specific in mind. That's exactly the kind of small-minded thinking I was hoping we could move past. No, it's not about anyone specific, I explained patiently. It's about us growing as individuals and as a couple. We're young. We're in college. And maybe we shouldn't feel pressured to be each other's only romantic experience forever. I think we're mature enough to handle something like this, and it could actually make us stronger in the long run. I went on to explain all the research I'd done, how couples who communicate openly about their needs tend to be happier, how exploration doesn't have to mean abandonment. I was honestly proud of how thoughtfully I'd approached the whole thing. Most people just stumble into these conversations without any preparation, but I'd really done my homework. What happened next was honestly kind of weird. Instead of asking questions or expressing concerns like I expected, Zachary just looked at me and said, "Cool, if that's what you want. I'm not going to stop you." Just like that. No discussion, no negotiation, no asking for time to think about it. His face actually lit up a little bit, which should have probably made me happy. But something about his reaction felt off. I started talking about how we'd need to establish ground rules and communication protocols, how we'd check in with each other regularly to make sure we were both comfortable. But he seemed weirdly detached from the conversation, like he was already mentally somewhere else. When I mentioned that we should probably discuss any potential partners before anything happened, he just nodded along without really engaging. We should be completely transparent with each other. I emphasized, if either of us meet someone we're interested in, we talk about it first. No secrets, no surprises. Sure, he said, but he was already closing his laptop and getting up from the couch. That makes sense. The whole interaction left me feeling unsettled. even though he'd agreed to everything I suggested. I guess I'd expected more resistance, or at least more curiosity about how it would all work. His immediate acceptance felt almost too easy, like maybe he'd been thinking about the same thing, which was fine. Obviously, great minds think alike and all that, but something about his demeanor seemed different for the rest of the evening. The next day, I was at the mall with my roommate when I saw Zachary sitting in the food court with this girl I vaguely recognized from campus. She was pretty in that basic way that guys always seem to fall for. Long, straight hair, tiny waist, probably spent half her paycheck on lip gloss. They weren't sitting particularly close or anything, but she was definitely flirting with him. I couldn't hear what they were saying from where I was, but I could tell by her body language that she was interested. Later that evening, I casually asked Zachary about his day, and he mentioned grabbing lunch at the mall but didn't say anything about the girl, which was weird. Right. We'd literally just agreed to be transparent about potential interests, and he was already being secretive. When I pressed him a little more, he finally mentioned that a friend from work had approached him while he was eating, but he was super vague about the details. What kind of friend? I asked, trying to keep my tone light and curious rather than accusatory. Just someone I know. Her name's Raven. She works at one of the stores there. Raven. Even her name was annoying. I asked what they talked about, and he gave me some generic answer about work and school, but something in his voice told me there was more to it. Over the next couple of days, I started noticing changes in his behavior. He was on his phone more, smiling at texts in a way that seemed different from his usual communication style. His Instagram activity picked up too. More posts, more engagement with comments. That's when I started seeing her name pop up. Hard eyes on his photos, flirty comments on his stories. This Raven girl was clearly making her move, and Zachary wasn't exactly discouraging her, which would have been fine if he'd talked to me about it first, like we'd agreed. But instead, he was letting this whole thing develop without keeping me in the loop. 2 nights after I'd seen them at the mall, Zachary told me he was going out with some friends but was weirdly vague about the details. He usually told me exactly who he was hanging out with and where they were going, so the sudden secrecy was pretty obvious. I didn't want to come across as controlling or jealous. That would have completely defeated the purpose of opening our relationship, but I also wasn't going to let him walk all over our agreements. The next morning, his Instagram story showed pictures from what was clearly a date. Some trendy restaurant downtown, 2 drinks on the table, the kind of intimate lighting that screamed romance rather than friendship. And of course, Raven had posted her own photos from the same place at the same time. She'd tagged the location and everything, like she wanted everyone to know she'd been there with him. I felt that sick feeling in my stomach, not because he was seeing someone else, but because he was being so sketchy about it. This was exactly what we'd said we wouldn't do. We were supposed to be open and honest about our experiences, not sneaking around like teenagers. When I confronted him about it over FaceTime later that day, his attitude was completely different from the accommodating guy who'd agreed to our arrangement just a few days earlier. "Who is that girl who keeps hearting all your posts?" I asked directly. "That's Raven. I told you about her. You told me you ran into someone at the mall. You didn't tell me you were taking her on dates." He had the nerve to look annoyed, like I was being unreasonable. "You asked for an open relationship. Why does it matter who I'm seeing?" "Because we agreed to talk about these things first. We said no secrets. Remember, I didn't think I needed permission to go to dinner with someone." Permission. I wasn't asking for permission, I was asking for basic communication. The fact that he was already twisting our agreement to avoid accountability was honestly pretty revealing. This was exactly the kind of immature behavior I'd hoped we could avoid by being upfront about everything. "You were supposed to discuss it with me before anything happened." I reminded him. That was literally the first rule we established. I didn't realize grabbing food counted as something that needed pre-approval. He was being deliberately obtuse, and we both knew it. Grabbing food doesn't involve romantic lighting and Instagram stories designed to look like a couple's night out. But instead of owning up to the deception, he was trying to make me feel like I was overreacting. The worst part was how different he seemed. The Zachary I'd been with for a year and a half would have apologized for the miscommunication and made an effort to be more transparent going forward. This version was defensive and dismissive, like my concerns were an inconvenience to his new social life. "Look," I said, trying to get the conversation back on track. "I'm not trying to control what you do. I just want us to stick to what we agreed on. If you're interested in someone, tell me about it. If you're going on dates, give me a heads up. That's all I'm asking for." But even as I was saying it, I realized how much the dynamic had already shifted. He wasn't looking at me the way he used to. There was this distance in his eyes that hadn't been there before, like he was already mentally checking out of our relationship. The open arrangement was supposed to enhance what we had, not replace it entirely. Over the next few days, it became obvious that Raven wasn't just some casual fling. She was commenting on everything he posted, and he was responding in ways that seemed way too familiar for someone he'd supposedly just started seeing. They had inside jokes already. She knew details about his schedule and his family that suggested they'd been talking a lot more than he'd admitted. When I tried to bring it up again, Zachary got even more defensive. "I thought you wanted this," he said. "You're the one who suggested opening things up. I wanted us to explore other connections while maintaining our relationship. I didn't want you to replace me with the first girl who showed interest. I'm not replacing you with anyone." But his actions said otherwise. He was spending less time with me, texting constantly when we were together, making plans that didn't include me. The whole point of an open relationship was supposed to be that your primary partnership remained strong while you explored other connections. What was happening felt more like he was using our agreement as an excuse to emotionally check out. The breaking point came about a week later when I saw that Raven had posted a photo of them together at some family gatherings. Not his family, hers. Which meant he was already meeting her relatives and getting integrated into her social circle. That level of involvement was way beyond what we'd discussed for outside relationships. When I called him that evening, I was honestly ready to end the whole experiment. "I don't want to do this anymore," I told him straight up. "I want to close the relationship and go back to how things were." His response was not what I expected. Instead of relief or understanding, he looked almost annoyed. "Why?" "Because this isn't working the way we planned. You're not communicating with me about what's happening. And it feels like you're using this as an excuse to check out of our relationship entirely." "I'm not checking out of anything." "Then prove it. End things with Raven, and let's focus on us again." The silence that followed was honestly terrifying. He just stared at me through the phone screen with this blank expression, like he was calculating something. Finally, he said, "Then we should probably just break up." Just like that. No discussion. No attempt to work through the issues. No acknowledgement of the year and a half we'd built together. He was ready to throw away everything we had for some girl he'd known for a week. "Are you serious right now?" I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "You're going to end our entire relationship for someone you barely know. You're the one who wanted to change things," he said. "I was happy with what we had. But you said it wasn't enough. Now you want to go backwards, and I don't think that's what I want anymore." The way he said it was so cold, so matter of fact. Like our relationship had just been some placeholder until something better came along. All those times his family had talked about how perfect we were together. All those conversations about our future. All the integration and shared experiences. Apparently none of that mattered when push came to shove. "So that's it?" I asked. "You're just done." "I think it's for the best." And then he hung up. Actually hung up on me like I was some telemarketer interrupting his dinner. After everything we'd been through, everything we'd built together, he ended our relationship with, "I think it's for the best," and in a click. I spent the next several days trying to process what had happened. The more I thought about it, the more obvious it became that he'd been planning this whole thing from the beginning. His immediate agreement to the open relationship, his preparedness with Raven, his complete lack of interest in working through our issues, it all pointed to someone who'd been looking for an exit strategy, which meant he'd basically manipulated me into giving him permission to cheat. I'd approached him with a mature, thoughtful proposal about exploring our relationship dynamics, and he'd used it as a free pass to replace me with someone else. The whole thing was honestly disgusting. I tried calling him multiple times over the next few days, but he wouldn't pick up. When I texted asking if we could talk in person, he gave me some bullshit about needing space. Space from what? We'd been together for over a year. Didn't I deserve at least a real conversation about why he was throwing that away? His social media told the whole story, though. Suddenly, he and Raven were official, posting couple photos and acting like they'd been together forever. She was wearing his hoodies, meeting his friends, getting integrated into his entire life with zero transition period. It was like he'd just swapped me out for a newer model without missing a beat. The most infuriating part was how everyone was acting like this was some great love story. His friends were commenting on their photos with heart eyes and congratulations, like they hadn't all been hanging out with me just weeks earlier. Even mutual friends from our college group were liking and supporting their relationship, completely ignoring the fact that he'd essentially emotionally cheated on me to get there. So I started setting the record straight. When people asked what happened between us, I told them the truth. that Zachary had used our open relationship agreement as an excuse to cheat with some random girl from the mall, because that's exactly what happened. I'd suggested we explore other connections while maintaining our primary relationship, and he'd used that as permission to completely replace me. I also reached out to Raven directly, because she deserved to know what kind of person she was getting involved with. I created a separate Instagram account and sent her a message explaining how Zachary had manipulated our relationship to justify being with her. I wasn't trying to cause drama, I was trying to give her information she needed to make informed decisions about her future. You should know that Zachary was in a committed relationship when he started pursuing you. I wrote, he convinced me to agree to an open relationship and then used that as an excuse to emotionally cheat. If he did it to me, he'll probably do it to you too. She never responded, which honestly wasn't surprising. Girls like that usually don't want to hear the truth about their perfect new boyfriends. But at least I'd done my part to warn her. The situation got even more ridiculous when Zachary started blocking me on social media. We'd been together for a year and a half, and suddenly I wasn't even allowed to see his Instagram stories. It was such a childish response to being called out for his behavior. If he was so confident that what he'd done was right, why was he so desperate to hide from any accountability? That's when I decided I needed to talk to him face to face. His little sister, Sarah, was having her 13th birthday party that weekend, and I'd already been planning to attend before everything went to hell. I'd helped plan parts of the party, bought her gift weeks in advance, and had been looking forward to celebrating with the family that had basically adopted me. The fact that Zachary thought he could just uninvite me from a family event because he was embarrassed about his behavior was honestly laughable. These people had been treating me like family for over a year. His mom had literally told me she hoped I'd be around forever. I wasn't going to let his drama ruin my relationship with people who actually cared about me. So I showed up to the party with Sarah's gift and a genuine desire to celebrate her special day. The backyard was decorated with balloons and streamers, exactly like we discussed when I was still helping with the planning. Sarah looked adorable in the dress I'd helped her pick out online. It should have been a perfect day. But the second I walked into the backyard, the energy shifted. Zachary was there with Raven, and they were sitting together like some kind of established couple. She was wearing a sundress that was way too fancy for a 13-year-old's birthday party, clearly trying to make some kind of impression on his family. The whole thing was honestly embarrassing. "Hey everyone," I said, and walking over to where Sarah was opening presents. "Happy birthday, sweetheart." Sarah's face lit up when she saw me, which was honestly the best part of the whole day. At least someone in that family still had some loyalty. But before I could even give her the gift I'd brought, Zachary was standing up and walking over with this tense expression. "What are you doing here?" he asked quietly. "I'm celebrating Sarah's birthday. Like we planned weeks ago. I don't think it's appropriate for you to be here." Appropriate. I'd been part of this family's celebrations for over a year, and suddenly my presence was inappropriate because he'd decided to replace me with some girl he barely knew. "So this is the girl you cheated with," I said, looking over at Raven, who was pretending to be fascinated by the gift wrapping on the table. "I didn't cheat on anyone," Zachary said, but his voice was getting louder and people were starting to stare. "Right. You just emotionally manipulated me into agreeing to an open relationship so you could replace me guilt-free." That's when his mom came over, and I was honestly expecting her to be on my side. This woman had hugged me at Christmas and told me how happy she was that Zachary had found someone so wonderful. She'd confided in me about family drama and asked my advice about dealing with Sarah's teenage attitude. We'd had a real relationship that went beyond just dating her son. But instead of greeting me with her usual warmth, she looked uncomfortable and a little annoyed. "LaToya, I think it might be better if you left." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Are you serious right now? I've been part of this family for over a year." "I know, and we appreciate everything you've done. But Zachary asked us not to invite you today. Zachary asked you, what about what I want? What about the relationship we've built?" But even as I was saying it, I could see that the decision had already been made. His whole family was looking at me like I was some kind of intruder. Like I hadn't spent countless holidays and weekends in their house. They'd all apparently decided that Raven was the new favorite, despite the fact that she'd literally just appeared in their lives. "You said you loved me," I told Zachary, not caring who heard at this point. "You said I was your best friend. That was before you decided our relationship wasn't good enough for you." "I never said it wasn't good enough. I said we could make it better. By seeing other people, by being more open and honest with each other." But he was already shaking his head, and I could tell that nothing I said was going to change his mind. He'd rewritten the entire history of our relationship to make himself the victim and me the villain. According to his version of events, I was the one who'd ruined everything by suggesting we explore an open relationship. And he was just an innocent victim who'd been forced to find love elsewhere. "You need to leave," he said finally. Now, the worst part was how everyone just stood there and watched it happen. His dad, who used to joke about how I was too good for Zachary, his uncles and aunties who'd welcome me into family gatherings, his cousins who'd added me on social media and invited me to their own events. They all just watched as I got humiliated and kicked out like some kind of party crasher. "Fine," I said, because there was no point in staying where I wasn't wanted. "But you'll regret this. Zachary, when she gets bored and moves on to someone else, don't come crying to me." I left the party with whatever dignity I had left, but I was honestly devastated, not just about losing Zachary, but about losing his entire family. These people had been part of my life for over a year, and they'd dropped me the second it became convenient to do so. That evening, I decided to post about what had happened on Facebook. People deserve to know the truth about the situation, especially our mutual friends who'd been commenting supportively on Zachary and Raven's photos. I wasn't trying to cause drama, I was trying to provide context that had been missing from the narrative. Sometimes you think you know someone, and then they show you who they really are. I wrote, "After a year and a half together, Zachary convinced me that our relationship would be stronger if we were more open with each other. But apparently what he really wanted was permission to replace me with someone else. Today, I got kicked out of his family's party for trying to maintain relationships I'd built over months of genuine care and involvement. It's honestly heartbreaking to see how quickly people can throw away real connections for something new and shiny." I tagged a few mutual friends who I thought should know what was really going on. And I posted a video of myself explaining the situation in more detail. I wasn't trying to be dramatic. I was just being honest about how hurt and confused I was by the whole situation. The response was honestly mixed. Some people were supportive and said they'd suspected something was off about how quickly Zachary had moved on. But others seemed to buy into his version of events, acting like I was being bitter and vindictive for telling the truth about what happened. Even worse, some of our mutual friends started unfriending me on social media, apparently deciding that maintaining their relationship with Zachary was more important than supporting someone who'd been genuinely wronged. It was honestly disgusting to see how quickly people would abandon their principles for social convenience. But the most infuriating part was how Zachary and Raven just continued on like nothing had happened. They kept posting their couple photos and getting supportive comments from people who knew exactly what they'd done to get together. It was like the entire situation had been rewritten to make them the heroes of some great love story, while I was cast as the bitter ex who couldn't handle their happiness. A few weeks later, I heard through mutual friends that Zachary was planning to transfer to a university closer to where Raven lived. Apparently, their relationship was so serious that he was willing to change his entire academic plan to be near her, which was honestly hilarious, considering he'd always told me that his education was his top priority and that he couldn't make any major life decisions until after graduation. But I guess when you find your soulmate at the mall food court, suddenly all those principles become negotiable. It just proved what I'd suspected all along, that he'd been looking for an excuse to make major changes in his life, and I'd accidentally given him the perfect opportunity. The transfer was supposed to happen in August, which meant he'd be starting fresh somewhere new with his perfect new girlfriend, and none of the messy history from our relationship. Meanwhile, I was stuck dealing with the aftermath of his decisions and trying to rebuild social connections that had been damaged by his lies about what really happened between us. It's honestly been months now, and I still can't believe how everything played out. I approached him with a mature, thoughtful idea about strengthening our relationship, and he used it as an excuse to completely blow up our life together. The fact that everyone is acting like he's the victim in this situation just shows how good he is at manipulating narratives to serve his purposes. But I know the truth about what happened. And eventually other people will see it too. Relationships that start the way his and Raven's did don't usually last, especially when they're built on deception and manipulation. When she realizes what kind of person she's really with, maybe she'll understand why I tried to warn her. Until then, I'm focusing on moving forward and building connections with people who actually value honesty and loyalty. It's been a hard lesson about how quickly people can change when it serves their interests. But at least now I know who Zachary really is underneath all that fake nice guy behavior. The whole experience has honestly made me more selective about who I trust with my heart. next time. I'll make sure I'm with someone who appreciates genuine attempts at growth instead of someone who's just looking for an excuse to trade up to someone else.